Well, good morning, everybody. Um, how are we doing? Everybody all right? Yeah, jolly good. We're just waiting to see if there's a few more people joining. Um, so, how I propose to do this session this morning is similar to the way I did it yesterday. So, I'm quite happy if you want to ask questions as we go through, because quite often, you might think of a question and then at the end, when we'll have time for questions, you forgot what it was that you were going to ask. And I'm quite happy to be interrupted. It's not a very long presentation, in line with the size of the little things that we're going to be soldering. So we'll see how we go. What I intend to do, I've got a bit of a presentation that we'll just go through, and then at the end, I'll try and demonstrate some of the things I've been talking about on the bench. So, Nick, are you happy for me to make a start?
Yes, well, we're all ready.
Okay, righty-ho, fine. So, the soldering of surface mount devices, shortened to SMD. Now, on this opening, first of all, can you see that slide, all of you? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay, good. On this opening slide, this is actually a photograph of a cab, a Merg digital DCC cab, and there are quite a lot of surface mount components on here, and I thought it'd be just interesting just to look at some of them. Can you see my pointer? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay, good. There's this item here, which is labeled C5. That's a capacitor, and that's what a surface mount capacitor looks like. These are not polarized, so you can fit these either way around. Here and here, well, here's a better picture perhaps. That's a little resistor, and again, it doesn't matter which way around you attach it to the board, and it does have a special code on it so you can identify the resistor. The capacitors don't, so you do have to be sure you keep them in the packaging with the label on, because if they get mixed up, you'll never be able to identify which capacitor is which value. This little item here is the C-bus chip, and it's effectively a miniature version of the chip you put it on through C-bus through boards. It's got a little dimple there, and it is important that that's fitted the right way around, otherwise it won't work. Here we've got perhaps one of the harder elements to solder, which is the pick, and you've got 28 legs that need to be soldered to quite fine little pads on the board. So, what do we need when we start? So I'm just going to go through the list. A lot of you will know these things already without me having to say anything, and I did talk about them yesterday. So a well-lit bench, non-metallic bench, good ventilation, so we've got fumes coming off the solder that we want to avoid. A soldering iron, but this time we're looking at, the last time when I was talking about through hole soldering, I was saying that you need a fairly reasonable sized bit, so you need plenty of heat. But because we're dealing with a much finer component, and certainly with legs on the picks, the legs are very small, you need a fine tip, one that goes down almost to a point. I bought mine as a spare part for an Antex iron, which I use from Rapid, and in fact it's a copper bit. Actually, that's quite important as well, because the copper, the bits that we use can become magnetized. Now, that's fine for through-hole components because they're being held by the holes. But when it comes to this board, you don't really want a bit that could get magnetized, because you don't want the little resistors or whatever jumping towards the soldering iron bit. So being copper, that solves that problem. Soldering iron stand, tip cleaners, which we went through last time, side cutters, thin nose pliers, glass iron pen, toothbrush, flux cleaner, tray to keep everything in to keep it from scooting all over the floor, our multimeter, anti-static strap and desolder. So very much similar to the session we had yesterday. Here's some extra ones that we didn't talk about yesterday, and a reworked jelly flux, and I will talk about this in a minute because this is my method of doing this. Micro solder, because you don't actually want great big blobs to solder on these bits. We talked about the iron, that should be copper, not iron. Anyway, soldering. Oh, I see. Soldering iron. Yeah, that's a mistake. Now, this is quite useful. Bamboo skewer. I've been to people's barbecues and they have things that they put on the barbie, and they come already speared onto a bamboo stick, and they make ideal soldering tools because they can come in different sizes, and you'll see in a minute how I use my bamboo stick. Brilliant for pushing things around. You can sharpen them down to quite a good point. You probably need a pair of tweezers. I prefer not locking tweezers, and the reason I do that is because through experience, if you're trying to hold a very small item and you have locking tweezers, they put a level of pressure on the ends of the tweezers, and what happens then is you jog it and suddenly the chip flies off the end of the tweezers. So I prefer to have just ones that you can sense the amount of pressure you're putting on with your hand. A very sharp knife. I mean, I use a scalpel, and that's mainly to get the components out of the packaging, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. And magnification. You need something to be able to see close to what you've done and what's happening. And then additional things which we talked about yesterday as well. A PCB holder if you want to use that sort of method, and a desolder pump can be happy if it all goes pear-shaped. So, as of yesterday, look at the instructions. Make sure you understand and can identify the components. Make sure the PCB is ready, i.e. it's clean. And then an additional one from yesterday is buy an inexpensive, and I can't spell inexpensive, buy an inexpensive kit to practice with. And a good kit to buy is the Merg kit 461, which in fact is what I'm going to show you in a minute, that I'm using as a demonstration piece. It's a gaslight twinkler, so you can actually use it around the railway if you want to, but it gives you several types of surface mount component that you can practice and get the hang of doing it. And it's not very expensive. I think from memory it's a couple of quid, so or might be a bit more than that, but it's not very much. And it's better to have a go at that, practice on that, and then if it all goes pear-shaped, you can throw it away, don't worry about it. But rather that than buying a cab at £38 and getting yourself tied up in knots with that. More expensive to throw away. Now, there are lots of different ways that people can do surface mount soldering, and certainly all people, you find their best way, and they will find a way that they think works well for them, and there aren't really anything that I would say that's wrong or right. It's just what really suits you. What we're going to be talking about today is my method, because I found that method for me works very well. But some of the others that I've seen, and there probably are others that I haven't listed. So quite a lot of people like to use solder paste, and I put there with or without a mask. I did see a demonstration where somebody had actually made sort of a plastic overlay that went over the PCB that had holes cut out for every pad, and then they put the paste over the top of it, spread it over the top, and so it only left the paste where the pads were. But it seemed to me to be far too complicated for a hobbyist. But anyway, that was their method. And to actually solder it on, a soldering iron obviously can be done, but you can also use some hot air guns that go up to a fairly high temperature. Difficulty with the air guns is that hot air you need to contain the hot air really, because you don't want to be burning your fingers while you're trying to solder the component. But I have seen people use hot air guns with paste. They just put everything out on the paste and then they just run the hot air gun over the lot. And there is one guy that's demonstrating doing these on a PCB. So he actually puts the PCB, once he's put the paste on the pads, put the components onto the paste, he then puts the whole lot on top of a hot plate and heats it up. And although I haven't seen him do it, apparently he's had great success at that. So, you know, don't knock it until you've tried it, I guess. Then some people tin the pads with solder and then put the component on and then just reheat the solder. There is a difficulty with that. Obviously, if you've got a lump of solder on a pad, the component is not going to sit down nicely against the PCB. So you need to be a little careful about how much solder you've got on the pads using that method. There was another guy that demonstrated to me. He used an ordinary multi-core solder. He used a normal soldering iron, and he effectively just flooded all the legs with solder, so the whole lot sort of solid. And then he used a wick, a copper wick, to actually wick away the excess solder. And for him, it worked. For me, it looked far too messy, really. And then my favourite method, which is using this rework jelly. I buy mine from Rapid, so that's the one that I'm using. It comes with a little pot of fine solder as well, and it comes in a syringe. And you'll see in a bit why I like this idea. Because the flux, the rework jelly flux, is actually sort of sticky. It helps because it helps stick the component to the pad while you're trying to solder it. Because that's one of the difficulties with this can be. You really need three hands. You need one to hold the solder, one to hold the solder on, and one to hold the component in the right place. So here we have a gas twinkler. Unfortunately, I didn't have any blank boards, so these are ones that I've used in the past for demonstrations. So they do have some components already on. So you've got the various pads. Most of them are marked out fairly clearly. You just need to watch the ones that have a little cross, because this happens to be the pads for a surface mount LED, and it has a little positive mark there, and you need to mount the LED the correct way around. We'll show you that in a minute. And in here is the pick for this particular board, and you obviously got all these legs to solder. But the method I'm going to show you works for that. Works for anything that you need to do, really. These bigger holes are just if you want to put through hole. So if you wanted to connect a couple of LEDs remotely from the board, the idea behind this bit of it is that you can actually get the thing to work with the surface mount LEDs and see it's working, and then you can also put some leads in there to go to a remote LED that you might want to put in a lamp post or whatever you want to do with it. And that's just the junction to come into the board. Right, so if you get the kit, that gas twinkler kit, it comes sort of like this. So you've got a card, and on the card are laid out all the components, and they're all in these little packets. Now, the ones that are missing here, a bit fortuitous, are the capacitors, which are in here. So all these ones here have a note on them, and you'll see they've put on the card a 2K2 resistor, and it's marked up with 222, or a 5K6 resistor, and that's marked up with 562. As it says here, these capacitors, all 6 of them, are not marked. So if you get those muddled up with another kit with the same capacitors, you'll not be able to distinguish which one's which. This down here is the small yellow LEDs. So on this picture, we've got the jelly flux, which is this in here. I don't, but there is you can have a fine nozzle on the end. I don't bother with that because I take the jelly out with the end of my skewer, my bamboo skewer stick here. And I just take a little dab of it out to put on the board. Um, the other reason is that then if you put the nozzle on, you've got to clean the nozzle, and it's a very fine nozzle, so I'd rather just take the cap off and put that back on. Here's a little packet of resistors in this case that I've taken off of the card, and they are ready to cut. I mentioned the bamboo skewer, and here's the fine solder that comes with this jelly flux. So we get the board ready. We lay the board on the surface of your workbench. Somebody was talking about using blue tack yesterday, and actually I sort of said for through hole I didn't think it was worthwhile. However, for surface mount, particularly if it's a one-sided board as this is, you could put a little bit of blue tack underneath this board just to keep it steady on your workbench so it doesn't scoot all over the place. Where I would avoid using blue tack is where you're starting to put it on tracks or pads, because you know, I'm just concerned that you'll get a little bit of residue left behind. And in this case, we're going to put some surface mount leads onto here. You may question, and I pointed out before you asked the question, it appears that there's some solder on these two pads here, and that was because unknowingly or unwittingly, when I use this board for demonstration, I put two components on there that weren't the right components, so I had to take them off. And in fact, it proves the point that you can take them off. And in fact, how I did that was I used that rework jelly, flooded the area with that rework jelly, heated it up, and I was able then to remove the component. It's actually, they were actually the diodes, which I've now installed in the right place, which is down here. So here's the little surface mount leads, and I mentioned a scalpel or a sharp knife. What I do is I cut between the components. There's a plastic film on the top of that's holding that component in a little tray, and I do one at a time, and I cut it through there, and then get the point of the scalpel underneath and lift the flap, so that I've got a lip of this clear cellophane folded back and the component exposed. We need to get the ready with the jelly flux. So here's my bamboo skewer. You probably can see a little bit of jelly flux on the end of that. I hope you can. I have dabbled that. We're going to fit the one in the middle here. I have put a dab of it here and here, and I've been quite generous. You know, that jelly flux will go a long way. Don't be mean. You can clean it off afterwards. Better to have too much than not enough. And then we start. Now, what I do is, because the jelly flux is sticky, I pick it up on the end of my bamboo stick. And in fact, what you can see there, this is the LED here. This is the back side of the LED that we're going to put against the PCB. And you see it's got a little green arrow, and the green arrow is to tell you which way around to fit it. It does tell you that in the instructions, but as it happens, the green arrow should go away from the positive sign, so the green arrow will be shaped like that. So there it is on the end of my stick, and then obviously I just flick that over and put it on the pad. Unfortunately, I'd already soldered that before I took the photograph. So this is the way that I soldered. So you see, I've got my fine point solder iron. I've got the solder here, and actually it's very similar to the through-hole component. You need the soldering iron to heat both the pad and the end of the little component, and then introduce the solder into that so that it runs with the flux around the component. And in fact, here you can see that one that I've just done. You can see this sort of lump of solder. You can see how it's attached to the end of the surface mount LED. So there's another shot. And then we talked yesterday about continuity, and probably even more important with surface mount components, because it is very easy. Where these legs are here, for instance, um, you can get a solder on the top of the leg, but of course that's of no use whatsoever. What you actually need is the solder between the pad and the leg, electrically connecting the two together. And it is quite can be, if you're not careful, an easy thing to do to not have that connection. So again, I use the probe on my multimeter and I check where the track's going. So for instance, by looking at the board, I can tell that that solder pad on that surface mount LED goes along here and joins to that pad there. So what I would do is put that gently on top of the component here and the other end on here and see if I get continuity. And as I say, as you get more experience, you won't need to do every component, but I would recommend that if this is your first time doing this, it's worthwhile doing each component at the same time. And I've just remembered something that I should have mentioned. Let me go back. Right. One thing I should have mentioned, I just remembered why I should have mentioned it. When you are preparing to get the component onto here, so here's the component coming on, and it's going to go onto these two pads. When you solder it on, only solder one end first. Do not solder both ends straight away. Solder one end first. Make sure that you've got it in the right place, because with your bamboo stick, if you find once you've got that solder built there, you can actually move by heating that up with the soldering iron. You can then move the little component with the bamboo stick so it lines up with the other pad. So don't worry if you solder this and the thing's sort of over one side and actually there's a gap the other side. That's fine. Just heat it up, move it. By only having one leg soldered gives you half a chance of redeeming the situation you've got. And then, as I say, once you're happy with that, then you solder the other side. In fact, these LEDs are a case in point, because the LEDs are they are almost the same size as the gap between the pads. So actually, it's quite important that you get them very close, because otherwise you've got a gap to bridge with the solder. So it is important you sort of position it so it's in the right place. Lost my train of thought. Where was I? What was I doing? Continuity. Yeah. So if you find that you get you know, you haven't got continuity, you haven't got a bleep when you check the two components, then obviously you've got a chance then of having a good look at the component. In the past, if I've got a really difficult, particularly on these legs, I might reapply the jelly flux, because it will, as it's heated, run by capillary action underneath the component. And you know, it's much better to do it at this point than it is to wait until you finish the board and then find you're trying to get into very difficult places with your soldering iron. And it's like all these things. I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt. You know, I am the one that melted the plastic pot shaft with my soldering iron, soldering a cab together. Okay, so inspect and clean up, and we mentioned about those alcohol swabs. Very good for cleaning up the board, get rid of the excess flux, and that's it. And then you've done that, be proud, move on to the next one. So what I'll do now, I'm going to try and change cameras, he says. And what I need to do is stop that share. Just trying to share the screen. I don't want it on there, do I? Lost. Sorry about this, guys. I'm just trying to get the right camera on the screen.
John, you don't have to go to that trouble if you'd rather carry on. If everybody just selects speaker view. Oh, you've done it. Okay. Are you sharing the wrong screen?
Is that it?
That's it. Yeah. Well done.
Can you all see it? Yes? Yeah. Okay, good. So what we've got here, can you see the little board? I mean, I know the camera's not particularly good, but Mick, if you can just give me yeses so that I know. Can you hear me, Mick?
Yeah, that's fine, John. We can see that.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, and hear you.
Okay.
I wouldn't have been able to answer you if I hadn't heard you.
That's true. Okay. So we've got one of these little LEDs. I'm changing glasses to my magnifying glasses so I can actually see what I'm doing. So what I'm first of all doing, I'm getting the little component, which is another LED in here. I'm just getting the scalpel in to release the component. This is where I stick the scalpel in my finger. I do have a first aid kit handy. Right, let's remove that. I don't know whether you can see the little component in there, probably not. So I'm going to take my jelly flux. I'm going to get my little, ease out some jelly out of there. You can see there's a bit come out. Going to get my little bamboo stick. I'm going to put it on the pad. And then I should have enough to pick up the LED on there. There's the LED. You see it's got an arrow on it, so I know which way around it's going to go. We put that on there like that.
John, unfortunately, your right hand is in the way.
Right, okay, yeah. So can you see I've now pushed that on there? Try and do it left-handed.
If you move the green PCB out the way and put that one in the center of the board, that would be better.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's it. That's good.
Okay, so the little component is now sitting on the board there. I'm going to get a bit of tissue to wipe the jelly off of this. So I've got my fine solder ready. I've got a very thin iron. I suppose I ought to check it's on. Yeah, that's handy, it is. That's useful. I think you may have seen me talk about this yesterday. I'm just putting it in some bit cleaner. This stuff here. Put it in there. This has solder in it, and it cleans the end of the iron. And then I take the surplus off with the scourer pad or whatever it's called. So I need to have a nice clean iron at the end, which I have. And then what I'm doing now is I'm getting the solder onto this pad here. Now, as you can see, that isn't in the right place. The solder, I hope you can see that. The solder is on the item, but the item is not in the right place. I'll just heat the solder up. And check that. And at this point, I would normally check my continuity, make sure that that is, oh, well, I'll do that because why don't I do what I said I do? So I've got my multimeter beside me. And I look at the board and check where that track goes to. So you follow the track on the board, and I can see that go to this pad here. So I push that. I don't know whether you can still see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you put it on there. And I get continuity. So I know that I've got, that's a good solder joint. So I now can do the other side. Turn the board round so you've got it facing the right direction for what you're doing, what's comfortable. And then we apply solder to this pad. I'm lifting out to look at it. So that looks fine to me. Check the continuity again, which I won't do now. And then these are the little swabs that I use. I mean, obviously I wouldn't use one for every joint. I'd do it at the end when I finish. And just simply, clean up the board with this, and it cleans all that flux off. There we are. So job done. So little LED attached to the pad. Now, I'll switch back to see if there's any questions. Take my glasses off because I won't be able to see. Switch camera. Here we go. Okay, good. So, forgot what I was saying now. Well,
any questions?
Are there any? Go on, say again.
Any questions?
Any questions? I was going to say, are there any questions from anybody?
That gel that you put on, did you cover the whole area in the gel? I couldn't quite see. Yes. Or yes. Just the pads?
Oh, no, just the pads.
Just the pads.
The pads. Yeah. But I mean, I always put plenty on, and then I've got excess. It's effectively just a flux.
It's just a flux. Yeah. What was it called again?
It's called a rework jelly.
Jelly. Okay.
Yeah, rework.
Will you be kind enough to share your slides?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, what I'll probably do.
Before you go any further, John.
Yeah.
For everybody's information, this whole session is being recorded. So after the event, probably tomorrow, you'll have access to the complete.
Is it possible for me to, because it's one of the things I haven't done, I ought to have a slide on there that's got the components that I've used. Is it possible to add that or not?
If you produce a list, John, we can add it to the website.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll do that then. So I'll include the rapid part numbers so that people have got that if they want to follow suit.
Hello, John.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why do you fit the LEDs to the pad would you not want them to be remote when they're in use?
No, I did explain that. I think you must have missed it. There are two sets of pads. One for a surface mount LED on that board, and the reason that's there is so you can test the board in isolation. And beside it is a parallel pair of pads that you use for a remote LED, either a couple of wires to remote LED or well, usually a couple of wires.
All right. So this is just
a dual.
This is a demonstration.
It's a demonstration. The idea of including it in the kit, because the kit is all about practicing with surface mount, is they're tricky to do, so it's a way of checking that. And also the board is complete. You don't have to plug it into anything. You plug in the power, it's already there showing you what it does.
Right. So in the real world, you'd actually, instead of fitting
in the real world,
the board,
you'd
have two wires and fit it remotely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
John, you mentioned at the beginning that the capacitors weren't polarized and they could fit in either direction. Is that the same for all capacitors, or are there big uns and little uns?
You're absolutely right to call that out. The other thing that we didn't talk about is diodes as well. There are some surface mount capacitors that are polarized, and you will see those. So I'd actually, now where have I got one? I can show you quickly. Where did I put it? Just talk amongst yourselves. There it is. I don't know whether you can see that on the big camera. That's a little surface mount capacitor, and if you see at the bottom, it's got two little pins. I don't know whether you can see that. And it is polarized, so you have to be careful to make sure that goes the right way around. And the same with diodes. Well, same with the LED as well. The diodes and the LEDs all have to go the right way around. But the other capacitors that are not marked are.
Thanks for that clarification, John.
I love the alcohol swabs for cleaning. I use IPA on ordinary boards. Is that right?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have IPA on the bench all the time, but the swabs are just handy because you can just they're pence, they're fractions of a pen. I mean, I bought a couple of hundred, and I think I got them off eBay, or they're either eBay or, well, I don't know where I got them. Amazon. No, I think I got them from Amazon. Anyway, wherever they are, they're a few fractions of pence, and they're just handy. You can just wipe it and then chuck it away. Whereas rather than getting a cloth out and using IPA, but yeah. Like all these things, a lot of these tips are things that I picked up from other people. Well, there's some original thought, but a lot of it's what I've somebody I thought, oh, that's an idea.
It's the way it goes with everything.
It's the way it goes.
John, is that gas twinkler powered with 5 volt or 12 volt?
Good question. Don't know. I think it's 12, but I may well be wrong. I will tell you. I have the technology. That's not it. Three to 15 volts. 3 to 15 volts. So you got a scope there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Harry, do you have a question? You've unmuted yourself.
No,
Harry, mate.
no, I did not mute me. I don't know who did that. Sorry about that.
Okay, Derek, how about you?
Well, yes, I was wondering about the use of tiny solder balls to make the application of the solder more easier. and to eliminate the need for 3 hands.
Yeah, I have used solder balls, and yeah, it's okay. You have. I mean, with using the rework jelly, it's quite handy because what the trouble with solder balls is they're a ball. So if you put them on the thing, they fly off, in all directions. So the jelly will hold them in place, and you certainly could do that. But I think it's easier with the. I find it easier with the wire. But yeah, there's no reason why not.
Yes.
So, if you wanted to have a go at that, I have got some. You can get them in different sizes as well.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, a big advantage of them in a way is that you get a known amount. So you put the right size that you want on, and that's the solder you get.
Yes.
Off the end of you can get more or less. The difficulty, I suppose, would be that if you find that it hasn't really done the job you wanted it to do, if you've got the solder wire in your hand, you can add more, which you can't do easily with the ball. But I think you try it and see if it works.
Yes.
I wouldn't rush out and buy the balls just to do this. But if you happen to have them, yeah, why not?
Yes. Yes.
The thing about paste, a lot of people think the paste is the way to go, and people like Mike Bolton only ever use paste, solder paste. There's a couple of things about that. Solder paste, first of all, has a life, and if you're not using it regularly, if you've left it a couple of years and then try to use it, you'll find it's gone off and won't perform as well. But the other thing for me is that with the solder paste, when you heat the leg up, you might not easily see whether the solder has truly melted on both surfaces under the leg of the component. And you can then end up with a dry joint, which you find out when you continuity test it. And then of course what you do then is you get some solder and you heat the leg up again and introduce solder like we've just been doing. Well, in my book, I'd rather just do it straight away and be done with it. The other thing too is, which we didn't mention actually, well, I did sort of mention it, but I didn't mention it specifically. When you're soldering a multi-legged pick, like the CAN-CAD pick, that's 28 pin, you've obviously got to get every leg on every pad, and the pads are not particularly big. So it's part of the process is trying to get it lined up so it matches. And what I do is I solder one pad only, and then I can move the pick around a bit whilst heating that one pad until I get it in a position that I'm happy with. Solder paste is not as easy to do that with, because once you've heated it up, it's sort of gone. So you quite often have to introduce more solder. So, I mean, as I said right at the beginning, there's all sorts of ways, and people get used to doing it their way. This just happens to be a way that works well for me.
Is there not a way of using something sticky to hold the component in, so it's not a bigger component like a chip, in place while you solder it? I mean, something really sticky.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, where do you stick it and what to? You could, I guess you could clamp it, maybe. I don't know.
In mass production, don't they use something to actually stick the components in place and then put it through the bath?
Well, they use a masking. They do it with a mask. Don't they? They have a mask that goes over the PCB that holds all the components in the right place, that are then fed by machine into the various holes. But whether they use something that sticks, I don't know. The difficulty would be, ensuring that you got rid of the stickiness once the job was finished. And certainly, when I've taken manufactured PCBs apart, I've never found the components stuck to the board. They're always loose. I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question really, 100%. I mean, it sort of makes some sort of sense.
John,
yeah.
Yes, they actually do. They put a very small amount of glue material, and I think you'll find it's washed out or cleaned off by the water bath afterwards that you clean the PCBs with.
Okay, well, there you go. Thank you for that.
Andrew, do you have a question?
Yes, I do, but it's not related to electronics. It's more the soldering technique. I'm going to have a couple of things which are very, very tiny, which I've got to solder together. So I was just wondering whether this jelly flux would work with, shall we say, ordinary brass or nickel silver.
Yes, this wouldn't be a crosshead on a rail motor, would it, John?
No chance. I've got to find the bits on the floor first. Yeah, watching yesterday.
The answer to your question is yes, and in fact, I've done exactly that. So it's effectively a flux. So I mean, you have to be a little careful where you spread it, but you know. Is it Jerry? No, Gary? Jerry. We're talking about doing crank pins and a little bit of paper between the pins, and then putting the solder on there, and the paper prevents the solder from running down by capillary reaction. Well, you could put a little bit of jelly flux on the, as I have done, and it serves exactly the same purpose.
Thanks very much.
No, the answer is yes. And the advantage of the jelly flux is that it's sticky and it's got that, you know, it doesn't, it's not like a fluid that just runs off. It stays where you put it.
Thank you.
Does the jelly flux, John, have a lifespan?
Well, put it this way, I'm sure the answer is yes. The one I'm using currently, I bought 2 years ago. I'm now looking at it to see when it expired. Oh, well, it doesn't have an expiry date. This one was made in 2018, and I've just used it. So
yes,
it's seen, and because you get a lot more than we need. And I think it's about 15 quid, something like that, with it and the solder. Then you get the two things together in a pack. Don't think it has the rapid number on this. Oh, I know where it might have a rapid number.
I've put it in the chat, John.
Oh, you have you? Well done, that man. Yeah, well, I've got the rapid number, but not really very useful. I've got the first 4 digits. Does that help? 8562.
Yeah, the last 2 digits are 76.
Okay.
As Mike said, he's put it in the chat, so it's there for all to see.
Yeah, for some reason I can't see that. I had this problem yesterday. I can't see the chat.
Yeah, well, Alan's got his hand up. Alan, over to you.
Yeah, hi, John. Who am I talking to? John. On your Twinkler, you had the pick with all the little
legs,
prongs on it. And was there any tips about dealing with that? Is it similar to putting the chip on that you looked at yesterday on the other board, or what?
Yeah, no, it's sort of a similar idea. I just repeat what I did actually say just now, but what I do is I put the jelly flux on all the pads that the whole pick's going to go on. I put the pick on roughly in the right place, but I only solder one leg, and that gives you the opportunity of moving the component around to get it placed. And it is important that once you've got the one leg soldered and you think you have it in place, particularly with the pick that was on that 28 pin pick on the cab. If the pick is not fitting flush the PCB, what happens is if you have an error, as you get to the other end of the pick, it increases the error. And I had to fix somebody's cab where they'd actually got the pick. They soldered the first few and they were a little bit not flush to the board. And by the time I got to the end, there was a 1/16 of an inch gap between the board and the pick. So I had to effectively take the pick off altogether and start again. But yeah, so one leg first, get it positioned, make sure it all looks right, it's in the right way, all the pads are covered, and it's nice and flush to the board. And then do the opposite diagonal pin, and then once you've done those 2 diagonal pins, you've got it fixed in place, and then go and do each one in turn. One thing we didn't talk about, actually, which I should have said, when you're going across the pins, especially if they're very close together, you can get the solder bridging across 2 pins. Now, if you do that, don't suddenly go, oh my goodness, this is the end of the world. So fine, carry on with all the other pins, get them all done. When they're all done, go back to the pins where you've got this bridge of solder, clean your soldering iron, make sure, clean it in that scourer, and then put it on the pins, and quite often the solder will jump from the pins and coat the end of the iron, and actually you'll remove a little bit of solder without any further trouble. If you don't, if it's, that's not working, then you could use your solder wick to do the same thing, or the desoldering pump, which will suck away the excess solder. I mean, the other thing that I've done in the past is actually getting another component like a resistor with a leg on it, and putting a bit of flux on the end of that, and introducing it to where the bridge is, and heating the resistor wire up, and then it will actually attract the solder that's on the 2 pins to the end of the resistor wire, and you pull it away. So there are various ways of doing that. But the thing is, a lot of people panic, and they get, oh God, and it's all nightmare. Just finish it, and then come back and worry about that.
Presumably, you would put your flux on all the pads.
Yes.
First, even though you're only going to solder one end, one corner, or even diagonals.
Correct.
But because the flux would then draw the solder, because you want it in between the pin and the pad.
Correct. That's exactly right.
Right.
I mean, sometimes if I've got a pin that doesn't seem to want to take the solder for some reason, you can add the flux on top, just sort of over the top of the pin, because it will suck under, when you produce the heat to it, it will suck the flux under between the bicapillary action. So not all is lost, but certainly you start off with the flux on every pad.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions?
Okay, well,
thanks very much. I hope it's been of some use, and it's not as easy as trying to show you face to face. It's much easier. Then you can also have hands-on. I actually belong to the Warwickshire North Oxford group, MERG group, area group, and quite often I'll go and have people who will do one-to-one tuition so that people can get the hang of doing this sort of thing, which is easier than on Zoom. But it's
John, I hadn't seen that tip cleaner before.
Okay, that's,
but I've just found it on Rapid. It's called Loctite Tip Cleaner Tinner Cleaner.
That's it.
So that's
about £6, £5.95, something like that.
£6.49.
£6.49. Okay. Allow for inflation.
No, that was a good tip. That one. I'll use that.
A good clean tip, in fact.
Thanks an awful lot, John. That's much appreciated. As a sort of encouraging thing for the group, our MERG group actually ran a workshop on surface mount, and I think every person had a completed gaslight twinkler by the end of the evening. And it was an awful lot actually easier than most people thought, me included. I was quite surprised.
I mean, to be perfectly frank, when I first came across surface mount, I was very sort of unsure about my ability to use it and do it. I found this method in it which worked well for me. And now, actually, I prefer to build a kit that's got surface mount than I do through hole. It's far less bother because you haven't got to bend the ends of the legs, you haven't got to trim the legs off. I mean, there's and everything's much smaller, but so it sort of grown on me, if you like.
Doesn't it take longer though? Because you're no, because
No.
if you do a normal one, you put all the resistors in one go, tail over, and zap the soldering out across them, and it's done.
Yeah, then you've got to trim them off. Right? With this, you do virtually the same thing, except you don't have to trim any legs off.
But you do one component at a time, don't you?
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Well, whatever. Well, everybody does their own methods, so the best.
Oh, I look forward to trying it. I'll get one of these pesky gas twinklers, even though I don't need one. But anyway.
Well, and there's another one. There's a signal driver as well.
Yeah, I found that. It's SD2.
That's it.
Yeah.
Colour light signal driver. So
Yeah.
I mean, there's two. But the reason I recommend that is only because they're not. I don't know. Did you see the price of them? I don't know the prices.
The
I don't think they're very
gas twinkler's 302, and the colour light thing is 376.
Yeah, so not a lot of money. So if you sort of make a real mess of it, it can go in the bin without too much worry. Whereas if you start the cab, you sort of spend 38 quid and you it's a lot to lose. Okay.
Okay, everybody, thanks very much for coming. Any more questions? Last chance. Okay, well, yeah, as I say, thanks very much for supporting the event. Thank you very much to John for taking the time and trouble to do it. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.
In the spring.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Mick, for hosting.
Thanks, John.
Okay.